Hi everybody, I'm Stephanie and welcome to Sewing Stephanie. This is the place where we make fashion cool, modern, and fun. So today I'm really excited because I'm going to show you something awesome. We are finally going to take that basic bodice sloper that we have created. We've draped it to fit ourselves perfectly. If you haven't, make sure you watch those videos before you come here. And then we are going to take that basic shape and turn it into 3 really cool designer-inspired pieces. That's right, 3 different pieces that I found on a luxury shopping website that you can already take this pattern and turn them into. Before we get started, make sure you click subscribe below and hit the like button. You can also find me over at thestylesafari.com and my Instagram is thestylesafari. In order to get started today, I recommend cutting out several versions of your basic front bodice on tracing paper. I have 4 or 5 different copies here in case I make any mistakes, and I've made sure to mark the front dart as well as any notches. My favorite way to create multiple tracing paper copies is to create cardboard cutouts of the slopers that you've already made. So after you've draped your fabric and muslin, you've turned them into paper patterns, I then recommend using cardboard to create slopers. Make sure that there is no seam allowance anywhere on these pieces. It is very, very important that you use just the pattern, and then you can go in and add seam allowance to any designs that you make later. I've also created a little hole at the top of the dart as well as notches to mark both of the dart legs and the armhole. So I have 1 notch at the front and 2 notches on the back pattern, and that makes it really easy when you are tracing these to always know what's the front and what's the back. We're going to start with this gathered Roxanda top. It's quite easy in that there are no seam lines, but it does have gathering all along the neckline, which is held together by a bow. I'm not actually sure if that bow is functional or not. I assume it's not. So we are just going to drape this pattern without the bow, assuming that's just a decoration, taking into account these gather lines at the neckline. So starting off, we have a cutout piece of our basic bodice on tracing paper. We have tape, scissors, and then a pencil or pen, whatever you like to use. The first step is to connect, or to basically remove the dart. You can either cut out the dart completely, or just cut one side of the dart leg and then tape it over. We'll use a lot of tape when you do this technique, when you slash and spread, so it's a great idea to have a lot on hand always. I'm going to tape all the way up to that apex point. If you've watched a prior video, you know that the main point of the slash and spread technique is to remove the fullness from any of the paper pattern. That's the slashing aspect. The spreading is adding more fullness. So, since we have no seam lines on this piece, there isn't really anything to slash very readily visible. However, I do know that because of the gathers at the neckline, I need to increase that neckline. I need to increase it, and then the pattern will, it looks like it's almost pleated as opposed to gathering on top of itself, which means I need to widen from the neckline. The folds pretty much eliminate towards the hem of the top. It isn't very, very, very wavy, which means there's not that much added fullness at the bottom of this top. Sometimes, if it's even more full, it'll look like a tent shape, so more like an A, but this looks like a regular tank top shape with just the fullness at the neckline. That means we are actually going to cut down from the neckline into the, basically right below the arm line. That means we're going to cut from the neckline into the hemline, expanding out the bottom up. That means we're going to cut from the neckline to the hemline and expand the top out this direction. So let's just try it. So I'm going to take my scissors and cut right into this pattern, and I'm going to stop just before I reach the end. Cut through that apex point to relieve that fullness. Go to the hem. I'm going to do another one out here. So far I've made 3 cuts. We have a pattern piece that has 4 sections, 1, 2, 3, 4. We made 3 cuts. If we put it back together, you can see that makes the bodice piece. So this is it could be as simple as that. It could be that actually we're just going to tape this on a new piece of tracing paper and decide if that's the amount of fullness we want. However, there are a few other things to keep in mind. So I'm taking a new piece of tracing paper and place my pattern on top. You may be asking yourself, how do I know how far to spread out my pattern pieces? And I've drawn a little bit of a picture here for you. So oftentimes, if something is pleated and it fully double backs on itself, you can see that for every one portion, there's 2 that folds back on itself, which means if we have a 1-inch pleat, we actually have to have 2 inches in between to cover that pleat before the next inch section. So that means you would be expanding it by about 300%. These pleats don't look quite that big. There's maybe a few more of the pleats or gathers, but it's definitely a more subtle pattern. So I'm going to only double it instead. So I'm going to add just about 1 inch on that piece. For this piece, I'm actually going to pivot at the plus line to close out the neckline a bit, and then I'm going to take that last piece and keep it open by about 1 inch. The reason I'm pivoting this piece is a couple reasons. One, you can see when you look at this top that the bust is actually this added fullness, this kind of ruffle or flounce just below the apex, which means that this extra fabric here is going to make that shape. So they didn't quite expand the neckline fully. We did it about halfway, and then everything else was maybe a little smaller, about 1 inch opening. We could stop there. That would be perfectly acceptable if this was a top that only hit the waist, but because this top actually goes to the hip, we want to expand it a little bit. So I'm actually going to push these pieces up on my piece of tracing paper, and I'm going to expand them even more. So now I'm going to take the next step of saying, all right, let's add a little more fullness, maybe 1 inch at the top, but then opening it up to 1 inch at the bottom. In this piece, between the second and third pieces, I'm going to keep it the way we had it, having just a little bit of added fullness at the top, quite a bit at the bottom. And then my third piece is going to do the same thing. It's going to have about 1 inch on the top and open just a bit more on the bottom. Now you can play with these things, kind of get it into a shape that seems to make the most sense. So instead of fully having a tent shape where the top would be connected and the bottom is super wide, we actually kind of have basically our bodice just expanded, and then the neckline will be gathered. So then I would go ahead and tape these pieces down. Once all your pieces are taped down, I would make sure that there's a straight line-ish around where the waist seam is. So even though this dart doesn't close, we're pretty straight in between these pieces, and you can kind of see an invisible straight line from the side waist to the center front waist. That, if we use our ruler, is our new waistline. Using the waist as a guidance instead of the neck is a lot easier because you can see the shape of these pieces is really jagged. Using your dressmaker's curve can help you true up and round out that neckline. So we've done away with the jagged cuts, and now this piece is much more smooth and it'll gather up on itself. Now what about the length? This is the waistline seam, and for this piece it does look like it goes maybe 4 or 5 inches past her natural waist. Let's go ahead and just add that right on. So you're going to continue the natural line. I'm adding 5 inches here. And I'm continuing this straight line of the center front. So you can see that. And then the same thing on the side waist. So I'm going to add 5 inches. My piece is a little short, but you get the point. Sometimes if I run out of tracing paper like I did here, I'll just cut a new piece and tape it on. There isn't any need for this to be perfect because this is real life. You will cut a piece that maybe is a little smaller than you intended, and there you go. I would go back in and add seam allowance to this piece everywhere except for the center front because that is where it's going to cut on the fold. Then, I don't have a picture of the back of the shirt, but I have to assume it's almost the exact same technique in the back shape. And I would cut it, slash it, and spread it just like we did for this piece. And you have a really cool top that you're ready to take out right now, ready to sew right away. You can even add in a fun bow detail. Let's move on to our second design. This is a C New York top, and it has a really cute ruffle detail over the shoulder and just below the waist. So we're going to start off by trying to mimic these seam lines and drawing them onto our sloper here. I'm going to fold it inside out to make it a little bit easier for me to draw. It looks like this first seam is basically right along that princess line. So I'm going to draw it right through the apex. And there is another seam line underneath the armpit. It looks to go, you can kind of see in this photo, it looks to go pretty close to her arm, and then it finishes out above the apex. So I'm going to draw it maybe right here. Then we have the waistline. So this sloper hits at the natural waist, and maybe this is a 3-inch banding. So I could take my ruler here, I can measure 3 inches, I can eyeball it. It's kind of hard to tell with these things if it's exactly 3 inches, so it's really up to you what you want to do. Then we are making clothing inspired by the designers. Now, I know that I'm cutting it with that bottom piece, or that waistband piece, actually doesn't have the princess seam in it. Oh, one more thing we have to take into account, the neckline. So that's going to be sit a little bit lower on her neck, and then it looks like it finishes out about equal to the above bust seam line. So I'm going to draw that. You can use a ruler, you can freehand, up to you. And this is the beginnings of this shirt. I'm actually going to go ahead and label all of these. So ruffle top, center, front. Ruffle top, waist, front. Ruffle top, side, front. And then I'll name this one sleeve cap. Okay. Got 4 pieces here. These three are all fitted. However, this one has that nice ruffle. It looks like it's flat going into the seam, but has added fullness around the edge, which means we will slash into the side from the outside into the seam where it's straight and expand from there. Looks like it's kind of nice, soft, small ruffles. So I made quite a few little mini cuts. So I've taken that little ruffle cap sleeve and I'm going to spread it out here along some more tissue paper. And I'm going to tape it down. Okay, I have this piece all taped down. And again, if you're wondering, how did I know how much to spread it? The simple answer is, I don't know how much to spread it. You still have to create a muslin version of your designs. This is just cutting out the step of draping it in the first place. But hopefully you'll get closer to that shape by doing the slash and spread process. So the other thing I want to look at is the length of at the top of the ruffle here. Looks like it extends a few inches past the shoulder. If you remember, this little piece here actually hits just at the top of the shoulder. So I'm going to extend that by maybe 2 inches. So extend past the shoulder. And then, even though this is my main pattern line, I'm going to redraw that line. Here. You can use your dressmaker's curve to make a nice curve on the underarm. So it's unclear when looking at this pattern how the ruffle looks underneath the sleeve. It might just go flat as I've drawn here. It might disappear, in which case it goes straight into the side. So I've actually decided to draw that piece straight down instead of following the curve of the pattern piece. So when I compare it back to the side front piece, this one, I can look at it and say, oh, you know what, it's actually not gonna go all the way to the end. It's gonna go an inch, and I'm gonna add a notch here so that I know exactly where to match those 2 pieces up. Then let's take our curve again and true up the inside of this curve. It's really sometimes easier to do with your hand. And then we can decide again what kind of seam allowance we want to have. When truing up a corner piece like this, instead of drawing that corner out to go really, really long, the best way to do is to follow the actual sewing line. So if one sewing line is here, or pattern piece line, and if one sewing line goes here, I'm just continuing that line, then you actually can cut your piece off right here. And just to further draw that out, that means a blunt edge at the end of the point. Sometimes when you have pattern pieces that are like really tiny at the end, that seam allowance can just kind of drift on forever, which is crazy and confusing. In reality, you want to chop it off right there. Now, circling back on our top, we have 4 pieces. We have the center front, the waistband, the side, and then our great new gathered sleeve cap, which once it's gathered in, it's gonna create a nice ruffle right along the shoulder. The piece we're missing is the gathered part at the waist. This is really easy. You don't even need a pattern piece in order to create it. The only thing you need is the measurement of the waistline. I'm gonna take my ruler and measure it as, looks like it is 7 1/4 along this edge, 7 1/4. So now that I know that bottom edge is 7 1/4 to the waist, I can make a very simple pattern piece just from that. So I can measure the top here as 7 1/4. Just make 2 little marks, marking the end. And then I can decide how long do we think that is. It might be the same as the last piece where it's about 5 inches, so we'll just make a 5-inch square. We are going to cut this piece on the fold, so I know it looks a little wonky right now, but that's because you're only looking at half the front piece. So that, believe it or not, is going to turn into this ruffle. Once you have that pattern piece cut out, we go ahead and slash and spread this piece just as we've done quite a few times at this point. I have this piece all taped down. The only thing that's of vital importance when you are spreading these little pieces is that each one should be spread approximately the same amount. You don't have to measure, but you can't have 1 or 2 really tiny and 1 big. Otherwise, your frills will not be evenly placed. And because this fabric undulates up and down at an even rate, you have to open up your pieces at an even rate. If you want just one crazy fold somewhere, which is totally a design, preference, then you would open one piece up much more than the others. As soon as you have all your pieces taped down, double check and make sure that you've added the seam allowances correctly, as well as the green line. So on the center front piece, this one, I've added a green line pointing up and down along the center front. Because this has the trim here, this does have a seam, and so I will need to cut 2. In contrast, the waist front is just cutting 1 on the fold, which folds across here. There's no center seam, and so I've done the symbol to indicate that it's cut on the fold. For the hemline, I actually made a mistake and added my seam allowance and then realized it is also cut on the fold. So I've remarked that and added in the symbol to mark cut on fold. Then I went back for the other pieces and added in, or just make sure I wrote down the notch on both the side front piece as well as the sleeve cap piece. You can go and re-cut these, you can go and relabel them. I've used a combination of pencil and pen here. It's obviously not the cleanest, but sometimes I go back and forth between which tools I like to use. And either way, you are going to use these, cut these out, create a muslin version of the top, and then you can go back and you can edit these pieces. You don't have to start from scratch. You can, maybe expand that one a little more, add another layer of tissue paper underneath. Or maybe you need more room in the waistline. These are all things that you can go and edit once you've already created your top. Let's go and get ready to work on the next one. Okay, we're on to our final designer top of the day, and by far the most fun one that I'm really, really excited about. So this is a Marques Almeida top, and it's a simple cami, but it has a really awesome design line just under the bust with this massive ruffle that's been added. So let's get started. Right away, I've taped up my bodice piece, and I'm going to actually use my pencil to create the design line. So first, let's do the neckline. I feel like the straps are pretty far out, so those are gonna go right about here. Looks like the straps were added separately, but for the sake of this pattern, I'm gonna include it as part. And then we go pretty low down, at the middle of the armhole, it starts coming out. And then I think we wanna finish about right here, so something like that. That's gonna be our main neckline. Okay, let's first cut that piece out. Now we have to do the same thing for the under bust line. So it actually looks like this hits maybe just at the waist and then kind of curves up a few inches into the center front. So you know what I'm gonna do just above the waist here. Perfect. Okay. So I'm gonna use pencil, right? I'm actually doing this as I videotape this with you guys. This is not, I haven't pre-done it, so it just goes to show you what kind of a, kind of a process video it is. Okay. I'll put it back so you can see that. Cool shape. I really love that curved aspect of it. Okay. So our bottom piece is flat, and if you have followed along with my last pattern, you know how we're going to add length to that and spread it. It is worth noting, though, the reason I picked this top is actually not for that super exaggerated hemline, but it's actually to talk about the bust. So I'm looking at this top. There are no clear princess darts anywhere underneath the bust. It's possible there's one at the side seam, but I think that it's actually just been released into ease underneath the apex. That means there is the fabric is not pulling in underneath the apex of the bust. It's actually just hitting the bust and falling straight down, which is great. It makes our life much easier. Just cut this open and release that fullness, and then instead of creating this as a dart where we're going to sew it up, or even as ease where we're going to gather it, we're going to just leave that open shape when we tape it and put it onto some more tracing paper, because there is no ease in this garment. It's really just hitting the bust and then falling straight down, which is actually beautiful, because sometimes when you're pattern making, you want things to be really fitted, but sometimes you want to understand how to make things not fitted at all. And in order to do that, you let the dart be what it is without having to take it in. So let's take a look at this pattern piece on the bottom. As I showed previously, it looks like it has about triple the amount of fold that is necessary for this piece, which means that we're going to slash and spread it to triple its length. I'm going to create, it's actually quite clear where the folds are. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 on each side, which means I'm going to create 4 cuts. It is as scientific as that. Seems like how would that possibly be true? But it is. Now the tricky thing to remember here is that we cut this pattern from a basic bodice which ends at the waist. And looking at the pattern, it does look as if the center front ends at the waist, but then it cascades down from there. So what we want to do is measure this center front piece, and I'm just going to make it a little bit more visible for you guys. Looks like it is 6 inches. Wow, pretty convenient. And then from every point from there on, I'm going to draw down 6 inches. Just to make it a little easier. I'm drawing out in the middle of the gathered, of the openings. You can see it opens, and then I'm drawing a line out 6 inches. And then following that teeny tiny bit we had here, again, following that out, 6 inches. Now we have a very large piece here that we're going to connect. I'm just going to connect it using my hands. It's not going to be perfect because the piece is a moving thing, so you can go back and say, maybe it doesn't follow the curve exactly, maybe you want to round out that hemline a little more. You can fix the curve here. And then when you create your muslin pattern, you're going to decide maybe it could probably be even more fullness than that. So I've taped down the top piece, and I cut off the top that's going to be a skitty strap, because that's going to be an entirely separate piece that just fits in, just a skinny strap. And I want to measure the bottom hem with that excess of the dart, so about here. And it looks like it's about 11.5 inches following that curve. And I can see here, because I did not add in that extra room for the dart, I'm at 10 inches. So that's about right, because this is a little bit like 1.5 inches added here. So I need to go back in and add in at least 1.5 inches into this bottom piece. So I made 3 slashes into that pattern piece, and because we know we need to add 1.5 inches, I'm adding 3 cuts of 1/2 inch each. And I'm going to use another piece of tissue paper and just tape it right underneath. You may be looking at this pattern piece and think, what a mess. But that's the process. The process is slashing and spreading and folding and twisting until you get the shape that you think is the most suited towards your design. And you can always go back and trace it onto cardboard or another layer of tracing paper and make it clean once you're done. But don't be afraid to get messy. Don't be afraid to chop it up. I don't like when videos show you everything clean and precise where nobody makes any mistakes, because that's not real life. Real life for me is a pattern piece that looks like this to start. Then I create a muslin, and then if I want to create a new pattern piece, I will. Otherwise, I'll save it, because I know what went into this piece, and I know how much I've expanded or not. The last step here would be to add in your seam allowances, which I'm not going to do for the sake of today, but make sure you don't add any to the center front. It's going to be cut on fold. Both pieces are going to be cut on fold, and then when you do the back, you can really design however you want that back to look, but just make sure this length, the side seam of the ruffle, and of course the underarm side seam are exactly the same. When you're sewing it, you're just going to ease this shape into this shape, and you will naturally get a really, really beautiful fold. Side note, it does look like there's some interfacing placed, like 3 inches of interfacing maybe placed at the bottom of this ruffle in order to give it that stiff ruffle. So think about that if you decide to make this top. You may think, why doesn't it look the same? It's because they've really thickened this ruffle here in order to make it really stand out. That's it. Thank you so much for following along with me today and creating 3 amazing designer-inspired tops using that Basic Bodice Sloper. As a reminder, you can create your own basic bodice by following the links in the show notes below, and please make sure you click subscribe and like this photo so that other people can find it and make some amazing tops as well. Thank you so much. See you later.